Welcome to part 2 of Strategies and Supports for New ELL Student. And we're looking at these strategies with Jorge in mind and how we can help him on his language learning journey. Explicit instruction is the next strategy for supporting ELLs. This means Jorge needs clear, well-presented instructions given in simple English. According to Anita Archer, see references for her video, this can be divided into 2 main parts. The design of the instruction. This lesson is made clear to Jorge because it's divided into understandable sections. The lessons are designed with clear steps, including demonstrations. I do, guided practice, we do, and checking for understanding, you do. For example, if the lesson is about life cycles, you'd start with a lot of pictures of different life cycles and maybe match which animal matches which life cycle. Then the class could use a graphic organizer to write the life cycle of a human. Everyone could do that together. Finally, the class could watch a video of a specific animal, maybe an ant, and independently use another organizer to draw a picture of the ant's life cycle. This would be very helpful to Jorge because he would be getting lots of guided practice before working by himself. The next section is called the delivery of the instruction. All instruction needs to be interactive so that Jorge and other ELLs in the class have a chance to practice language in a safe place. An example of interactive instruction would be a reading group where a teacher has a chance to work with a small group of students with specific targeted skills. Jorge would need to be in a group with others who are learning English, focusing on his learning goals of survival words and phrases like, "Could you help me?" or "May I have a pencil?" Monitor and watch students' responses. Give feedback on students' responses. This can easily be done when working in a small group, like mentioned above. It can also be done in a whole class way by giving examples to the entire class in the form of unanimous examples. Keep a lively pace to the lesson so students don't lose interest. ELL students like Jorge will experience extra stress every day because they're constantly trying to figure out the language and culture. Keeping the lessons quick will help Jorge and others like him pay attention more easily. Keep in mind the information about explicit instruction from this slide is a paraphrase of the video by the Center for Dyslexia entitled "Why Explicit Instruction" and features Dr. Anita Archer. I'd like to add that Jorge needs context cues, gestures, and pictures to help him understand instruction. For example, if the lesson is about animal life cycles, there needs to be pictures and diagrams to help Jorge understand at least some of the content of the lesson. It would be even more helpful to him to take him aside before the lesson starts and to introduce some vocabulary to him so that he can follow along more easily. Because he can read in Spanish, this information can be written down with both Spanish and the coinciding English words. Students need practice that should be deliberate practice. There's a purpose in mind, like Jorge needing to learn survival words, so he practices phrases like, "I need to go to the bathroom." Practice that is spaced over time. For example, if Jorge needs to learn the vocabulary for items in the classroom, he needs to practice every day, not just once on Mondays. This is why phonemic programs like Haggerty and UFly tend to be so effective for teaching reading. They are an everyday practice that review the same skills in different ways over and over again. A program like that is quite effective for students like Jorge, even though he's in grade 5. Practice retrieving information. Like Jorge needing to remember vocabulary from the previous day by speaking the words without checking a dictionary or word wall. Another example of this is Jorge remembering the letters, sounds, and blends from a phonemic lesson after practicing them all week. According to the BC ELL standards, explicit language instruction for Jorge, who's a level 1, would look like this. This means it's up to the classroom teacher and the ELL teacher to work with Jorge and help him learn basic vocabulary and simple phrases for success in the classroom. Jorge will need lots of opportunities to practice his knowledge and skills through explicit instruction. The ELL teacher will be able to help with this by working with the classroom teacher, giving suggestions and further support. The real Jorge, who actually has a very different name, works with one of our ELL teachers on UFly several times each week. He also has a lot of in-class support, including an ELL teacher, who happens to be me, giving his classroom teacher ideas and supplies to help his learning. Differentiated instruction is teaching in a way that meets each learner's need, interest, and/or ability. It recognizes that each student is different. It includes content. For example, if the class is working through the entrepreneurship program and needing to create their own business model, Jorge's teacher may have to alter the content for him to understand. For example, if the class is studying an entrepreneur and using a lot of academic vocabulary like challenges, obstacles, and contributions, instead, Jorge could be looking up a series of those academic words in Spanish and adding them to his personal dictionary. He'll be learning the same information, but differentiated to suit his needs. He could also watch a video of a Spanish entrepreneur. Process. The way that Jorge learns this material doesn't have to be the same as everyone else. For example, if the class is watching a movie about an entrepreneur, maybe the teacher could find a similar video in Spanish for Jorge to watch at the same time on an iPad. Product. Often in this program, the grade 5s create something that they can make to sell to children from other classes. This includes making advertisements to go around the school. Jorge could present his advertisements in Spanish and have a classmate help him translate to make a poster for around the school. He's still creating the required product, but in a different way than other students. Another idea would be to have him create his advertisements on a computer and use Google Translate or a similar tool to translate his own work. Learning environment. During this project, there will be times Jorge worked in the same environment as his classmates and others, like when he needs to work on a computer or iPad, that he may need to be in a different place to be successful. Other examples of differentiated instruction include a student who takes a lot of time to complete an assignment, assign less work. For example, if Jorge takes a long time to complete a reading response page because he must read over the words several times to translate everything into Spanish, it's appropriate to give him easier reading material or less questions to answer. This will keep him from being discouraged. Some students, like Jorge, may need a graphic organizer, sentence frame, or word bank to be successful. Students, like Jorge, may need a different style of assessment. For example, it may be easier for some students to show their learning by drawing a picture and labeling it. For others, they may do better with an interview-style question-answer period rather than a written test. Still others may react well by playing a game with the teacher to show their understanding of a concept. This option works well in math, where there are a number of math games that can be used to show skill. For Jorge and all ELLs, remember that written assessment doesn't always show all of a student's learning, especially if that student is still learning the language and not yet fluent. Scaffolding instruction is when you give students a lot of help when they are just learning and slowly ease back on the help as they become more proficient at the target skill. Here's a good diagram of that concept. This diagram from Vonnie Lewis's slideshow article entitled Scaffolding shows that when a student, in this case Jorge, is starting to learn, he needs a teacher to model the work and provide a lot of support. This support will include graphic organizers, reading material and assignments translated into Spanish, labeled pictures throughout the class in English, and sentence frames to help with the conversation. As Jorge improves, he will hopefully need less and less help from his teacher. The main idea of scaffolding is that there's a lot of help at first, but the teacher and student work together to build independence. Sometimes this can look like the explicit instruction that I talked about earlier with the concept of I do, we do, and you do. Other times this will look like a teacher acting out what needs to be done or showing a video so that Jorge can understand the meeting. This diagram is a very simplified example of what scaffolding looks like in a real class. For Jorge, he will need quite a bit of support or scaffolding at the beginning of his learning journey. Hopefully over time, Jorge will need less scaffolding as he understands more of the language and is able to work more independently. This diagram is from Effective Scaffolding from Chaucer School. I chose this because it shows several helpful scaffolds that will help Jorge navigate school as he learns the language. Starting from the top, Jorge can use Spanish to complete his assignments. Places like Teacher Pay Teachers have many free and inexpensive material that is written in both English and Spanish. Many of these include reading material so that Jorge could learn the same material as the class, only in his home language. Moving clockwise, there are many options such as podcasts and audiobooks available for Jorge to listen to that help him learn English. One of these is called Easy Stories in English. I like this one because it offers beginner, intermediate, and advanced stories that are good for different English learners. The other podcast I found is called English Kids Story with Katrina. This one is a bit young for Jorge, but it does have an ELL focus, so it may help him during the first month or two of being in Canada. Moving along, modeling an assignment using facial expressions and pointing are all scaffolds that would support Jorge's growth. Working in a small group with a partner and having some verbal interaction would be helpful for Jorge. Some examples of this would be playing a math game together or building a poster with another student. Sentence frames and sentence starters are a good way to encourage Jorge to begin using his English skills. This can start as simply as, "Today I'm feeling," and have Jorge fill in the blank. Again, over time, Jorge will need less scaffolding as he works towards success. Connecting to background knowledge is helpful. This can be as simple as teaching some new related vocabulary to Jorge before starting a unit, or letting Jorge watch a video in Spanish about a subject before teaching it. I've already mentioned graphic organizers, but please remember that these can help Jorge with success by providing a framework for him. Finally, using visuals like photos and pictures and realia through the room to help Jorge with language development will make a big difference in his language acquisition. This can be as simple as holding up a lunch kit and saying, "It's lunchtime," to having faces with different emotions like happy and sad to learn feeling words. Think about what would make it easier for you to learn a new language and do that for Jorge. Thank you for listening to part 2 of my presentation. Part 3 will be coming up next.